Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to talk about the cost-benefit ratio when you are writing software. So let's get into it. Now, whenever you sit down and write a piece of software, you have to think about a few things, I would argue, at least on average. And if you don't think about this sort of thing, you will find that, that you don't write the right code for the situation. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, when you are brought up in school, basically, or rather when you go to the university, and it depending on, it really does depend in what type of education you have. I see a slight difference in certain education backgrounds when it comes to code quality and so forth, but for the most part, I think that most developers get to a point where they will focus a lot on the quality of the software that they write. This is not true, however, for, I'm not saying self-taught people, but I see a very big difference in people who spend most of their time where they don't have any formal background. They have a coding style that is a little bit more ad hoc. No, I'm not saying that this is a definitive rule or anything like that. It's just a gut feeling that I have. I've seen it a few times. So you could argue that this ad hoc way of coding isn't really good form, because there are a lot of more engineer types of system developers or programmers who kind of, they look down their noses at this coding style. And on the flip side of things, you have these freelancers and self-taught people, especially front-end developers, who have this very different mindset where they don't really, I think it's a hybrid between not knowing better and maybe having a different focus when it comes to code quality and so forth, where they kind of look at the processes that especially larger companies have and more established organization promote as a part of their work process. And I've long argued that there are two very distinct types of coding styles. You have, as I said, the ad hoc, more hack it together, get it to work, and then you have the perfectionist type of way where you kind of have to really think about testing, and you have to think about all these other things, right? And it very much depends on what type of environment you are in. I've seen it happen many, many times where, at least I can just take myself, for example. My background was based on Java and enterprise software development, which meant that when I came out of the university, I had been drilled into being the sort of programmer that most likely would have done very well in a large type of company, a place where there's a lot of money and the focus is on very high quality software that will work for a very long time. Now, I have met so many developers who come from the other perspective, who are either self-taught or have a background in other areas, smaller companies usually, freelancers, that type of thing. And most of them actually hate working at the enterprise level. And most enterprises, it kind of depends. Front end is a little bit special, but it's a very different way of working from what they're used to, and usually they don't do so well in that environment. That's at least my experience. I'm not saying that that's a rule or anything like that, but that's what I've seen. And that's usually how it goes at the larger company. So when I started, that was the way that I was taught how to write software, basically. The textbook, Martin Fowler, Uncle Bob, Kent Beck type of style of writing software. The issue was that my first job was a small startup. And at a small startup, the way to produce software, the coding style at these smaller companies, it's very different. It's much more in the other direction. As I said, it's on the other side of the spectrum. It's more ad hoc, more prototyping, more speed than anything else. And when I tried to apply my best practices, the things that I had been taught, test-driven development, doing all of that good stuff, I actually produced, or rather I didn't produce in accordance with what my boss basically wanted. I couldn't keep up because it takes a lot of time in comparison to what ad hocing and just hacking things together is going to take you. And then I went to a bigger company and had the same mindset, quality and so forth, and I did much better there. And I realized that, all right, there seems to be a red thread here. And then I spoke with a colleague of mine who made something very clear to me. Sorry about that, my voice is giving out. Something that was very educational. He explained to me that the trick to it all, to know when it's a good idea to write unit testing and so forth, and when to actually ad hoc things together and go for speed, the trick to knowing that is to figuring out what code is important to get right and what code is important to, or rather what's not so important to get perfect. And he described it as this, it's basically a mindset. It's a way of thinking about, or it comes with experience, but I thought it was a very interesting perspective that kind of contradicted my worldview, because as I said, I had been taught that the only way to write good software was to write high quality software, test-driven development and so forth. Because when you look at these different tech talks from people who promote these different practices, they speak as if this is a fact of the matter. They're telling you that test-driven development, for example, there's no other way, and it's just it's not even a discussion about whether or not you should do it. It's such you're already doing it, but it's simply not true. And that goes for everything, because when somebody's promoting something to you as an idea or so forth, it's very easy, especially when you're not that experienced, to absorb that and accept it as truth. And that's something we humans do. We do it a lot. In general, humans will take whatever they hear. If they are receptive of a piece of information, and they hear it from one source first, they're actually more likely to believe that anything that comes after that contradicts that worldview is wrong. And as I said, I struggled a lot with this idea that, I had colleagues who was trying to explain to me that, Fredrik, you don't have to write every single thing with unit tests, and you don't have to write every single thing as perfectly as you can. You just have to make it work and make it maintainable and so forth, have a bit of a pragmatic approach to things. But I resisted that idea because I had been taught that this was not true. It's almost like being part of a cult where they actually said, or I was taught as well, that there was no exception to this rule, that high quality software was the thing to go for. And I can only tell you now that the truth to this is, as what my colleague said, it's about figuring out when to write what type of software. Because if you think about it, if you are building a prototype type of thing, you're building let's say you're starting your own company or so forth, you don't even know if this code is going to be here in 2 weeks. It might drastically change. You're just putting something together to kind of see if it's going to work out. There is no reason for you to invest tons of time in doing integration tests and unit testing and going for quality. There's no reason for you to do that. Going for quality at the prototyping stage, or when you don't even know if the code is going to be around, is just a big waste of time. However, let's say that you have an established system, a big, large scale system that you're going to add some functionality to. You're just going to add to something that is already established and is going to run for quite a while. Then it makes a lot of sense, because you want to make sure that your tests are checking so that you don't break something unintentionally, which is usually the case. If you're adding code or changing code in a system that you may not have written yourself, it's very important to have these tests, because you, as I said, you don't know everything about the system. That's at least the way that I think about these things, and I think that that's the mindset you should have when you're doing your software development. Ask yourself, what type of code do I need to write right now? Have a great day.